Our speaker is the founder and general manager of AIBotics Private Limited. Mr. Liu Siyong believes in the mission to co-create the digital workforce of the future and help organizations unleash the full potential of their human workforce by making work enjoyable. Let's all welcome Mr. Liu Siyong.
Thanks, Elle. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. I'm delighted to be able to present at this event and to talk about the often overlooked pitfalls of automation deployment, right? And maybe before I start talking about the pitfalls, I think it's probably important to kind of set the context. Why are we even talking about automation, right? Really what I want to, show you is, bring you back to a picture of, the early 1900s. On the screen over here, this is a typical image of a factory probably in the early 1900s. In this case, this is the assembly line for Ford Motor Company. And what is striking about this image is that you can see lines of workers lining up along the assembly line, doing a lot of mundane, tedious, repetitive work, right? And now if you fast forward to today, right? If you look at a typical factory, a typical modern car factory, you can hardly see any human workers around, right? Instead, what you see is basically just the automobiles and also a lot of robots, mechanical robots that is fully automating the assembly work in this case, right? And why am I telling you this, right? Is because as we kind of in this area of the fourth industrial revolution, or some call it Industry 4.0, what we can observe is that there is a new wave of automation, right? This automation in some ways is quite similar to the automation that happened during the second industrial revolution, whereby all the mechanical work in the shop floor is being automated, right? And in this new wave of automation, what we are seeing is that a lot of the what I say, a lot of the clerical administrative type of work is actually being automated. And in many of these cases, the robots, that's automating this work is not the typical mechanical robots or physical robots that you expect, but really these are software robots, or what is now popularly called robotic process automation, or RPA bots, right? So we can see very clearly that in this digital era, a lot of the office work is actually being automated, right? And that is also kind of backed up by industry research and so on, where you can see many companies are now embarking on this so-called automation first trend, right? So with that kind of backdrop set up, what I'm going to share with you is really some of the common pitfalls that we've seen the various organizations fall into when they look to deploy, and more importantly, to scale automation across the organization, right? What I'm sharing with you today is kind of coming from the practitioner point of view. I've been involved in this RPA space for probably, I guess, the last 5 to 6 years. And I also had the privilege to work with companies from different industries, company across, users from different business functions, be it HR, finance, and we see a very clear trend on how companies can implement automation successfully, and also cases or situations where companies fall short, right? So the first point that I want to make is kind of really simple, but it's really fundamental, right? So when we talk about automation, or we talk about digital transformation, essentially what we are talking about is we want to move from the left of the screen to the right of the screen. So from the left, what you have is a very traditional kind of operating model where it is labor centric, right? Essentially what you have is you employ a lot of people who follow the processes that you define, and these people are actually supported or augmented by technology, right? But in this new digital era, right, a lot of companies are now employing what is called the digital workforce, powered by software robots. And what you have is a different operating paradigm, right? In this case, you're actually employing a lot of technology to automate the processes which are defined and managed by people, right? So there's kind of a paradigm shift where, in the labor-centric model, people are the kind of the hands and the legs doing the work, doing the grunt work, whereas in the digital era, people are kind of the brains, right? They are the one who actually supervise and decide what to do next, right? Having said that, there is a common pitfall in the sense that a lot of the companies, when they talk about automation, the first thing that comes to their mind is technology, right? What is the best technology in the market? How can I get it more cost effectively and so, right? But based on our experience, that is kind of missing the whole picture, right? We see a lot of times the most successful deployment of automation happens when companies focus on people, process, and then technology, right? So the really critical components really in the success of any automation effort is really about people, process, then technology, right? So there's this wonderful quote that I'll just read out to you because that kind of encapsulates the point that I'm trying to bring here, right? To adopt a people first approach or people centric approach when you implement automation, right? And why is this important? Because, as the quote says, one machine can do the work of 50 ordinary men, but no machine can do the work of one extraordinary man. So in our experience, we cannot ignore the human element. We need to make sure that, people are on board with us. They share the same vision of an automation first era with us. And then, we can be sure that we get the necessary support. Right, and this kind of bring me to the next pitfall, right? Which is that this thing called automation anxiety is real, right? I mean, you put yourself in the shoes of an employee. If you look at the news reports, you frequently hear cases or examples of companies using automation technologies to kind of automate the jobs, right? And so because of this, it is kind of understandable that a lot of these employees they have this automation anxiety or this fear that automation may result in job losses where they will be replaced or displaced by robots, right? And while I think to some extent those fears are understandable, and research has shown that during recessions, automation actually increases, right? So those fears are kind of exacerbated right now as we are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. But at the same time, I also want to point out that although the fears are understandable, they are probably not quite right in the sense that the robots, based on what we understand, are really here to augment the workforce, not to replace them, right? So I'm just giving you one data point, right? So according to McKinsey, right, the research that they have done, actually less than 5% of all jobs can be fully automated, right? Or put it another way, approximately about 60% of jobs, they have more than 30% of activities or tasks that can be automated, right? So what it means is that although these automation technologies are useful, they are not mature to the point that they can eliminate entire jobs altogether, right? So I think the point here to make is that it's important to reassure your employees that automation is a force for good, and how you do that is really through a lot of stakeholder communications. To communicate to them the rationale of implementing automation, how it will how the employees themselves will benefit from automation, right? And the third pitfall that I want to share with you is that automation is simple, but it is definitely not easy. If you go and do a simple Google search, you'll find a lot of information about automation technologies like RPA, and it's quite common to hear terms like low code, no code software. So it kind of conjures up the image that, hey, this technology is easy. I can do it myself, right? But the research shows that the results are not quite the same, right? So based on the research done, approximately about 30 to 50% of initial projects actually were not successful. And the leading root cause for this is that they have chosen the wrong choice of project for the wrong choice of process for the project, right? So the point that I'm trying to make here is that process selection is actually very, very critical when we talk about automation, right? Especially because some of the processes are inherently not suitable for automation. So typically processes that are, structured, well-defined, comes with digital inputs and output. Those are the kind of processes which are good for automation, but some other processes are not. Right. So again, I want to point you to this excellent quote. Automation is good as long as you know exactly where to put the machine. Right. And kind of follow on to that point is that before we actually deploy any automation technology, it is also important to differentiate two critical concepts, right? Effectiveness versus efficiency, right? And really the crux of this issue is that, if you apply automation technology to an efficient operation, obviously you will magnify the efficiency, right? But the converse is true as well, right? Because if you automate an inefficient process, or you automate the wrong process, right, you will kind of make things worse, right? And so this is really an interesting graph or chart that you see over here, right? The thing about effectiveness and efficiency is that, if you apply automation to the wrong things, right, instead of surviving or thriving, it will actually quicken your death, right? So to speak, right? So it is really, really important that, you apply automation in the right areas, in the right processes, right? So there must be fit for purpose, in other words. And a lot of times what this means practically to you is that you will need to you may need to re-engineer your processes first, right? So there are numerous methods. You could simplify your process, you could standardize your process, and perhaps in some cases you might even want to redesign your process so that it is more effective, and also it is more customer centric, because at the end of the day the process is meant to serve the customers or the stakeholders, right? So that's the 4.0, kind of differentiate between the difference between effectiveness and efficiency. And the fifth point, or the fifth pitfall, is to note that, automation is not an end in itself, right? Automation actually, in our viewpoint, is a journey, right? There is really no ending point in the game of automation, right? So what you can see over here is that, a lot of organizations, they start off with RPA because it's kind of easy to get started. It is you can get the ROI very quickly. So it's what we call the low hanging fruits. But it will be a mistake to think that, hey, I have implemented 2 RPA bots. I'm done with digital transformation, right? I've done with digitalizing my processes and automating all my work. Actually, that it cannot be further away from the truth, right? So based on our experience, automation is really a journey, and it actually encompasses many, many different technologies along the way, right? So an organization might get started off with RPA first, and then slowly, as it starts to automate more processes or start to automate more aspects of a particular process, you will realize that, hey, there are different other technologies that will be useful, right? So for example, maybe before you can even automate the process, maybe you might need to digitalize your information, right? Perhaps it could be a paper invoice that you digitalize, so that then the robot can actually pick it up and then enter it into your ERP system, right? Or to put it another way, right? What I'm trying to say here is that automation is just one of the many tools in your digital transformation toolbox, right? So don't go away from this, talk thinking that, hey, RPA or automation is just everything that's available out there, right? And the next point is, I guess it's really pertinent for this talk, because there's a lot of speakers who are talking about AI, machine learning. So I just want to give you a very quick difference between what's the difference between automation and artificial intelligence, because it's quite common that people kind of mix the two concepts together. So in our view, right, in our view, automation and AI are kind of two different concepts altogether. So when we talk about automation, we are really talking about the execution or the doing, right? It is usually very process centric, And essentially, you know, if I try to make it simple, essentially when we talk about automation, we are really referring to taking the robot out of the humans, right? Allowing the humans not to have to worry about all these robotic tasks. On the flip side, you know, when we talk about artificial intelligence, it is more about the thinking, the analysis, the analytics that is important, right? And because of this, right, it is typically very much data driven. And or to put it another way, right, when we apply artificial intelligence, really what we are trying to do is, you know, we want to try to put the human intelligence back into the robot, back into the system, or back into the machine, right? That's really what we want to do. Very quickly, just mindful of the time, you know, the next pitfall just to remember is that automation is not a skill set, it is a mindset. It kind of continues on from the earlier point whereby we shouldn't focus too much on the technology itself per se. And you know, automation is really a mindset. You know, it's one thing to learn about the various RPA tools and whatnot, but being able to apply the concepts that you have learned, being able to constantly think and reimagine how a task or process can be automated, that is a different skill altogether. And to us, you know, that's kind of really the more important thing to take note of. Also, to empower your employees to be able to drive automation ideas. So we really like the concept of bottoms up innovation. We believe that, you know, automation shouldn't be top down driven. It should also be bottoms up, right? So by inculcating this automation mindset to as many employees as possible, they will be in the best possible positions to actually spot the opportunities for automation. Okay, very quickly, you know, robots require upskilling and reskilling as well. So just like humans, you know, robots are like us. You know, you should not expect to deploy a robot and expect it to be able to work forever, right, till the end of time. Unfortunately, it's not quite simple as that. Robots do need tender, loving care as well. So just bear in mind that there's always a need to enhance, to retrain your robots so that, you know, they are kept up to date. And then the last point is that, you know, as any sportsman will tell you, there are two sides to a game, right? Attack and defense. Beyond just thinking about automating your processes to become more efficient, it's also important to be aware of the business risks that can arise from bad bots, right? And really, there's a lot of business risks that can happen. You know, it's pretty common knowledge that, you know, bots are deployed by a lot of adversaries to do things that, you know, can create a lot of damage to your business. So just bear in mind that while you're trying to use bots, you know, also take into consideration the risk that the bots pose. Right? So that kind of in a nutshell are the 9 pitfalls to avoid. I know this section is pretty rushed, so if there's any one of you who are interested to learn more about automation, you know, feel free to get in touch with us. You know, we're happy to do a complimentary consultation.